I'd like to take a moment to share with you an interesting conversation with a new client of mine. It's my hope that the story she has allowed me to share is a help to you, the way it was to her. She's 32 years old. She's been dating a man who was 35. They have been dating for just under 2 years. And she came to me and said, "Doc, I'm coming to you to make sure I'm not losing my mind." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, I believe he's toxic. He is in therapy, has been in therapy for 5 years, but the challenges that I've been having with him don't seem to align with the work that he claims to be doing." I said, "Interesting." I said, "In what ways are they not aligning?" She said, "Well, he's been in therapy and he claims that they've been covering things about his childhood and the issues that he's had as a man who grew up without his father." I think she said his father had left him and his mom when he was around 14 years old. And so that created some attachment challenges that he claims he's had in the future with other relationships that he's had up to this point in his life. I said to her, I said, "Do either of you have children?" She said, "No, we don't have children." He's never had children and she's never been pregnant. And they were having conversations about what that looked like in the future if they were to decide to stay with one another, being healed in those spaces and the implications of that on them raising children. And so he claims to be aware that, him having a wounded attachment style could have implications for how he could be a solid father in the future. And she said, "Doc, I think that's great. But," I said, "Well, what's the problem?" She said, "But while he's owned his challenges in therapy, when it comes to us and our disagreements, he won't own them." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, he says he's an avoidant. He says that his therapist has helped him come to the conclusion that because of his childhood issues, growing up fatherless, all of that stuff, that he is an avoidant. He accepts that he's an avoidant. He's been able to identify the behaviors that he's had in previous relationships and just previous settings, period, where this avoidant behavior has been prevalent. He can identify it and he accepts that. But when it comes to wronging me or mishandling me, he won't own that." I said, "Can you give me an example of that?" She said, "Yeah, I have a very easy example. We can have a simple disagreement. We can have a disagreement about a matter, and once it is proven that he is wrong about the thing that he was so adamantly clear he was right about, he won't do something as simple as apologize." I said, "Does he ever apologize to you?" She said, "Rarely. He rarely apologizes, rarely owns when he's wrong when it comes to me, but is also then quick to turn around and use all of this work that he's doing in therapy to talk about how he's doing the work. And because he is doing the work, that apparently he has to be right in all of these other things." I laughed on the call and I said, "That's very interesting." And I said, "Do you have any other examples by chance before I just offer you some feedback?" She gave me a litany of other examples. She said, "Also, though, he's very emotional and petty." I said, "In what way?" She said, "Well, in these said arguments, if I'm able to prove to him, that what he is saying to me was not correct, he absolutely, instead of tapping into his logic and agreeing with the very clear evidence that I've given to him that he's been wrong, he gets very emotional." She even called him sassy at one point, that he seems to, when it comes to their disagreements, be more emotionally charged in those disagreements than she is. I said, "In other words, are you saying you're more of the logic and he's more of the emotion?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, that explains how you've been together for 2 years. She said, "How can you say?" I said, "Well, it's masculine feminine energy 101. We went into that, but I said to her, in essence, that relationships between two people require polarity. And polarity is created when you have masculine energy and you have feminine energy. And sometimes, especially in a relationship between a man and a woman, sometimes the man is the emotional energy and the woman is the logical energy. And if they're both okay with it, it can work." She said, "Well, Doc, I'm not okay with it. I want to be the emotional energy, but I can't be the emotional energy because when we have disagreements, he becomes very emotional, very petty, very simple-minded, very simple in how he acts and responds, even in his behavior. And I can't deal with that. It's like living with another woman." And we both laughed. And I said, "Ma'am, you're 1,000,000% correct. And this is, unfortunately, an epidemic in our culture, that a lot of men are living emotionally like women, with women, and shocked why they don't get along. I said, but man, let me say this to you. The X factor in his work is self-awareness. I don't know his therapist. She didn't know his therapist. She just knows he's in therapy for sure. She's never met his therapist. I said, this isn't an indictment on other therapists, counselors, coaches, whatever you do. But I will say this, that not all work is created equal. The reality is, in this space, people can say what they want. There's such a thing as a good counselor and a bad one. There's such a thing as a good therapist and a bad one. There's such a thing as a good coach and a bad one. There's a reason why you have good, better, and best as categories when it comes to this stuff. And I said, ma'am, if he's been in therapy for 5 years and he does not have the self-awareness to admit when he's wrong, he ain't getting good work, number one, or maybe he's getting good work and he ain't applying what he's getting. But there's a major problem there. I said, would you agree? She said, I absolutely agree. I said, we know self-awareness to be honesty about who you are, where you are, and what you're doing. And I said, ma'am, let me just ask you a very simple question. How honest is he about who he is, where he is, and what he's doing? She said, well, when it comes to the conversations that he has with his therapist, very honest. When it comes to me, he's not at all. I said, then ma'am, you can't be honest on certain things and not be honest on other things and then call yourself what? She said, honest. I said, he ain't that honest. A part-time liar is also the equivalent of a whole liar. They're the same. I said, and ma'am, this is what we're dealing with here. And the reality is he's not avoidant. He's just stubborn. She said, wow, I didn't think of it that way. I said, he's stubborn. I said, do you know why he's stubborn? She said, I'm not 100% sure. I said, he's stubborn because he has the ability to pick and choose what he wants to own. And anybody who is willing to pick and choose what they want to take ownership for is a person who is not only absolutely not healed, it is also a person who is not being honest about their flaws. People who pick and choose what's wrong are also people who can't be trusted, which is why you're in a space where you're starting to question the connection you have with your boyfriend. It's not that you maybe don't love him or don't like him a lot, but it's hard to trust a person who picks and chooses between a minefield filled with wrong things. I said, ma'am, do you know what a minefield is? She said, I've heard of it. She says, those things in war fields where you step on something that blows up. I said, exactly. I said, if you walk across a desert and there are minefields and you don't know where they are and you got to cross that desert, how are you going to approach that? She said, if I'm being honest, Doc, I'm probably not going to walk across the minefield at all. I said, why? She said, because any place I step is going to be explosive. I said, and how are you going to know where to step? She said, I'm not going to know where to step. I said, why? She said, because I can't see the minefields, but because there are so many minefields that even if I trust to take one step, trusting to take one step could be explosive. I said, ma'am, you prove my point. I said, when people don't own all of their flaws, when people don't own all of their shortcomings, but they pick and choose what they want to own, it's like walking on a minefield. And the reality is you might take a step and you might not step on something that detonates and you might be okay. But that ain't going to give you no peace. Why? She said, because Doc, the next step could take my life. I said, ma'am, look at how clear you're making this when you say it out loud. People who don't own all of their flaws will have you questioning your own flaws. She at this point started to cry. I was shocked. We were just laughing. She started to cry. I said, man, why are you upset? Why are you crying? She said, because this is really not tears of sadness. This is tears of freedom. I really, Doc, was starting to believe that something was wrong with me because every time I attempted to have conversations with him about his behaviors, he would use therapy as a weapon against me, and it had me walking around on eggshells. I said, ma'am, that's called a minefield. And you are walking around on this minefield, still functioning in this relationship with a person who weaponizes therapy, not realizing that the next step could absolutely take your life. Not literally, but figuratively as it relates to your mental and emotional well-being. I said, ma'am, he ain't avoidant, he's stubborn. And anybody who weaponizes or uses their time in therapy and weaponizes therapy, they are manipulators at best and gaslighters at worst. And I said, his therapist, counsel, whatever he has, should have explained this. At the end of the day, anybody that goes to therapy but doesn't have the self-awareness to recognize the flaws in all of them are classic manipulators. She was very thankful and grateful for the call. We ended up having 3 more calls after that, and she came on the last call to what she called the very easy conclusion to part ways. She said, Doc, I decided to break up with him. I said, how did that conversation go? She said, well, I told him, I think you're a great guy. I think you have great potential. But my work has caused me to realize that if you can't be honest about all of you, you're probably not being honest about none of you. And I was very proud that she learned that in our sessions together. I hope this story made sense. If it did, type church in the comments with 3 R's. And then remember, you've got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you. What's up, everybody? This is Dr. Zeb. Listen, I've been dying to make this announcement for a very long time now, and I'm pleased to say that Inspire Nation has officially launched. Yes, we finally got a Facebook and YouTube community group where we're going to have exclusive content, exclusive shorts, exclusive discussion prompts, where we're going to engage with other people literally around the world who are on the same healing journey that we're on. I need you to go find these pages right now on Facebook and YouTube. Inspire Nation, follow the page, join the group, introduce yourself, and be prepared to link up with literally thousands of people around the world who are on the same healing journey, who are looking for the same resources, and who want to also be surrounded with other like-minded individuals who are growing in the same direction as you are. I'm so excited about this because it's the beginning of some great things I can't talk about right now. Listen, you got 2 jobs. 1, be better today than what you were yesterday. And 2, don't forget what I told you.